Everything that can go wrong for Keir Starmer is going wrong. The politest, the gentlest, the most hard-working people in this country are here in a mass protest. The farmers of Britain, the farmers of the United Kingdom are marching past because of this disgraceful, rapacious and unfair attack on farming economics and the ability of our country to produce food. It is one of the most shameful bits of socialist legislation that we have seen, not just from this Labour government, from previous Labour governments too. What are they doing? They're going to take 20% of the value of farms on farms that make 0.5% return on capital each year. That means they want 40 years of profit from every farmer in this country. 40 years of profit means there's no economy in farming, there's no business in farming, and there's no food production in this country. This is a really serious attack on our way of life, on the way of life in the countryside. And I'm not just talking about Somerset today, I'm talking about the whole of the United Kingdom. I've seen people here today from Derbyshire, from Northern Ireland, from across our great country, who are fearful that their livelihoods, their way of life, their history is being destroyed. There is land in this country that was bought by tenant farmers after the war, when this country recognised that it must never again be completely dependent on overseas imports. There are farmers who will have had land in their families not just for generations but for hundreds of years. This break with our history is being destroyed by a government that is a government of vandals, a government that has no concern for the prosperity and freedom of this nation. It is not surprising that I have behind me some of the best-mannered people in England who will not stand for it. Up with this, they will not put. They deserve my support, they deserve your support, they deserve the support of the nation. This is one of the worst pieces of policy that I have ever seen, and I hope it is overturned in the interest of the future of our great country, the United Kingdom. Well, as ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com, and I'm very pleased now to be joined by the Shadow Minister for the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Dr Neil Hudson. Neil, thank you very much for coming in. First of all, if the Conservatives get back into government, we would reverse this? That's a clear policy promise.
Absolutely clear. I was on the stage today when the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, said that, very much so, that if we get into power in a few years' time, the Conservatives will reverse this cruel tax. And it's a senseless tax and it needs to be reversed.
And it will have a profound effect on the countryside, won't it, as farmers have to sell up to pay it, that the Labour Party is saying, well, they can pay it over 10 years. But that attracts a 7.75% interest rate. And so anything that you delay for 10 years has effectively doubled. So there's no real amelioration from the 10-year payment.
The Labour government have brought this in quickly without a full impact assessment, so they don't really know the impact. But we've seen today the thousands of people on the street. Succession planning in farming is stressful at the best of times, and in terms of discussions around the farm kitchen table about sons and daughters taking on the farm from mum and dad, now with this punitive inheritance tax policy where the son or daughter is going to have to think about selling part of, if not all of the farm, to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds of tax, when actually they're going to be drawing an income each year. Some farmers take, what, £18,000–19,000 a year of income. Yes, the land is worth a lot, but it's, as you said in your introduction, is passed down through generations to produce the food that we, the British people, need.
And the economics of farming have long been pretty difficult. It's long hours of hard work for a low return on capital. They could sell up and be really quite well off. And farmers will be tempted to do that.
It is one of the most stressful occupations. I'm a veterinary surgeon by profession, so I've worked with farmers for a lot of my working life. And they work 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. In inclement weather, they have to face incredible stresses, financial, extreme weather events, flooding, acute animal disease outbreaks. To have this inheritance tax policy thrown on them now, one of the things I am passionate about is that the Labour Party do not understand the mental health impacts on the farming communities that this policy will bring in. And that is really, really worrying.
And I think I read you were the first vet to be elected to Parliament in over 100 years, and that you were motivated to do it after the disaster of Foot and Mouth, another Labour government not understanding the countryside. Is there a hostility between Labour and the countryside and rural areas?
I think there is. You're right, Jacob. I spent some time in the front line as a veterinary surgeon in the 2001 foot and mouth outbreak, and the Labour government of the day mishandled it. They didn't call the army in early, they didn't shut things down, they played politics with it. So I vowed I wanted to use my professional background and come in and see if I could help inform policy from behind the scenes. And very much, I think there's a disconnect between Labour, who don't understand rural communities, they don't understand farming, and I think they're just treating these people with contempt and actually saying, well, oh, there's only a minority of people, when actually their figures don't stack up. The bulk of people out there, the NFU, the CLA, the Tenant Farmers Association, when you look at the numbers, the majority of farms are going to be hit by this. But Labour are doubling down and saying, oh, it's only a small number of people that are going to be hit by this.
But does it actually fit in with Labour's view of the world, that it doesn't like intergenerational wealth? It believes in a socialist nirvana, and this is part of how they're wanting to achieve it, and they got a majority of 170, so to some extent they're entitled to.
They don't like that as well, and actually farmers are the custodians of our country. They look after our environment, they nurture it, and they produce the food that we desperately need. And one of the things that we are very concerned about is that this government doesn't understand the concept that food security is national security. And if you jeopardise the farming supply that we are dealing with today, then we are going to be not nationally resilient. And that is crazy in the complicated global situation that we find ourselves in.
And so how would you look to policy to evolve to help farmers, to make farming more economic in this country?
Absolutely. I think we've got to reward farmers for what they do. I think we've got to be saying to them, look, producing food is a good thing. That is a public good. And we need to protect farmland, precious farmland. The Labour Party now are eating into food-producing land, putting industrial solar plants on them when there's plenty of agricultural buildings, there's lots of brownfield sites where you can stick solar plants. And once that farming land has gone, it has gone. And the other thing we underestimate is if you hollow out communities and you take the people out, these farmers have their kids in the local primary schools. They go to the local churches as well. These communities will be hollowed out. And so, yes, they might be very nice to visit, but there'll be no one there.
But it's really an attack on the whole rural way of life.
Absolutely.
It is a Labour socialist hostility to the countryside, which they think is basically rich and Tory. It's part of their class warfare.
It is, and it shows a deep lack of understanding. And I think we've got to realise, in the pandemic, we realised the concept of key workers in our NHS, but also the people that produced our food, the farmers, the people who work in abattoirs, the vets, the lorry drivers, etc. Farmers then very quickly, once things calmed down, then started to be the villains in the piece again. And we've got the Labour government now saying to people, oh, well, you need to stop eating meat, you need to stop eating dairy. We all know that meat and dairy are part of a balanced diet, and farmers produce this food for us, and it's for people to choose what they eat.
I think that's such a good point, Neil. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm now joined by the distinguished former Labour MP, Sion Simon. Sion, thank you very much for joining us. Is this all about Labour hating the countryside and at COP admitting on the quiet that we'd have to cut our consumption of meat and dairy? Basically, Labour wants to damage the countryside.
I think it's a shame that you have to cover this in this really kind of knockabout and kind of cardboard cutout, hugely exaggerated kind of way, because I think there are serious issues that it would be much better if we could have a serious conversation about. I live in a rural community. I can not just I live in a rural community. I can walk 20 minutes in that direction to a cousin's farm, and I can walk half an hour in another direction to another cousin's farm. I've got lots of farm owners in my family who are angry about this, no doubt. I do not dispute at all that farmers are very angry about this. I also, it's quite clear, if you look at the numbers from the impartial sources, so not the NFU and the Country Landowners Association, but the IFS and the OBR, the Treasury, the BBC, people who don't have a vested...
I don't think the Treasury or the BBC are either of them independent. The BBC is an outpost of the Labour Party, and the Treasury gets everything wrong.
The BBC is the nearest thing that we have to an independent national broadcaster.
Oh, come off it. It's a left-wing... I mean, of course you like it because it's on your side.
And Treasury figures are produced by independent civil servants and
incompetent civil servants who are always wrong. I mean, I wouldn't trust Treasury figures further than I could trade the Treasury building.
And even you admitted implicitly that the OBR and the IFS are in fact independent bodies, and they all say that the same thing. They all come up with the same number, which is that this is not going to affect more than 500 farms a year, which is not nothing. That is still important, and I think there is an issue between Labour and the countryside. I'm Labour, and I was an urban politician, even though my family come from the countryside, and I do think there is a disconnect between Labour and the countryside. But I would like to fix that, whereas you're just trying to make it worse.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to protect the countryside, because if Labour had said...
How is your monologue helping farmers? Because Labour's not going to listen to that, are they? That's just class war in reverse.
Because Labour is trying to destroy the family farm, and that you know perfectly well that £1 million, and it's £1 million for the business assets of the farm and for the agricultural land. You know a tractor costs at least £100,000 now.
Plus £1 million inheritance allowance, so that's £2 million.
That's right. It's £1 million. It's £1 million of allowance. It doesn't become £2 million. It's £1 million of allowance that you have for your business assets and your agricultural land. So that will be your milking parlour, your tractors, your combine harvesters.
The animals.
£1 million, the animals. £1 million is only 100 acres. 100 acres is barely an economic farm nowadays.
And if you have a small bakery, you're taxed after £1 million at 40%. And how is that?
That's because that's an equally stupid policy. This attack on small businesses has received the most clarity around farming, but it's the same for people running other small businesses that have assets behind them. It's great for businesses that don't have assets that they need, so software businesses and things like that. But any manufacturing business that is asset heavy will be really penalised by this. It's a terrible policy, not just for farmers, and thank you for broadening it out, but for businesses generally.
The point that I was just making, as you perfectly well know, is that farmers already are a hugely special case. They're a hugely privileged, exceptional case that get huge benefits that other parts of the economy don't get. Now, we could have a reasonable discussion about whether that is right, but let's have the discussion in those terms. Let's talk about why farmers should get special treatment and what the special treatment should be, and not just have a slapstick attack on the Labour government as class warriors and haters. I do think Labour is far more than it's a rural party. It does draw most of its support from the cities. Its MPs are mainly representing urban people who often don't feel great sympathy for the countryside. But if you think what you did out there in Parliament Square today helped to improve that situation and make things better for farmers, I'm afraid it did. I'm afraid it made it worse.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us once again